Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics Football. It's Fran here, and we'll be kind of recapping my Game Week 2, and also kind of looking ahead in terms of transfers, and kind of also thinking and theorizing about the general transfers or issues that I think we all have in terms of our teams after Game Week 2 is concluded. Now, of course, I'm in a good situation where I think the core of my team is set, where I've benefited from having Benrahma and Antonio early, and you can see, even after a terrible week for a lot of players for me, even getting the captaincy completely wrong, which I apologize for as well, but you can't get everything right. With Dean getting 0 points as well, it was still a great game week for me where I still managed to keep my top 50,000 in the world rank. The issue, of course, now is that clearly Dean is a bit of a letdown, and I think one of the kind of big drawbacks for me is not just the fact that Everton conceded, but more so the fact that he didn't play a very offensive game versus Leeds, which tells me that I think in games where I think Everton expect to be dealing with an offensive threat, Dean is going to be posted much more further back, and as a result I think they're just better kind of defensive teams in the league, and access to those sort of players where I can get them for a 4.5, 5.0 price. And as I mentioned, you can definitely go for something like Sufal and Tanganga at this point in time. Now, with Tanganga, we kind of have to watch out exactly what's going on with the Tottenham fixture, with the second leg of their European Conference League game with Pacos de Ferreira. And that's going to be a tricky thing. Tsimikas is probably going to move to 4.1, which means that I'm going to get a profit of 0.1 if I choose to kind of move him out of my squad. I still actually think that Liverpool have a very strong shot of maybe keeping the game extremely low scoring, even getting a clean sheet versus Chelsea. I know Lukaku looked incredibly threatening, but I really have to say that was Arsenal, and I do think that Liverpool will present a bit more of a different task. We know most of the Chelsea games in the last season, in terms of the big games, were always low scoring as well. So there's potential there. I wouldn't really 100% say I'm going to either drop or sell Tsimikas. I think I'm still holding on to my transfers, and that is my plan basically until the end of the week, very close to the deadline, to be honest. We need to kind of be aware of several things, actually. So there's some EFL Cup games as well that people are playing, and people could get injured. People could be playing those games, and they could receive knocks or even be fatigued. That could be things to look out for. Another thing, of course, is especially as you can see here with a card with the travel restrictions, is that today we got some news that I think some of the clubs within the Premier League, and also particularly the bigger clubs like Liverpool and other teams that were initially involved with the Super League as an example, those sort of teams are actually looking to prevent their players from going on international duty to red listed countries. So whilst they're allowing some of their players to actually fly out and play games in amber listed countries, it seems like some of the clubs are trying to prevent their players from going to the red listed countries and play games in those countries. And this causes a lot of havoc in my opinion, because I think there's no actual precedent within the FIFA rule set right now, after the temporary kind of exemption in the previous year was lifted, where the clubs are actually allowed to do this. I think it's almost like a positioning, like politically, and I think we need to see some sort of confrontation between, or some sort of resolution between FIFA, the FAs, and the Premier League clubs as an example, to see what exactly happens. I still think it's not 100% certain that Salah will play, for game week 4, and that's a huge worry for me, because when you look at my team, Benrahma could be in a sticky situation, and Antonio could definitely be in a sticky situation as well for 2 game weeks, and of course with their value going up so much, you don't really want to move out of that team, and a free hit will also hurt you, because you do lose that kind of additional transfer for a week, in my opinion. And that is the kind of situation right now. It's a bit sticky, and I feel like, of course, if I was to actually make my team stronger and the travel restrictions weren't an issue, it's clear that I just move away from Dean. But as things stand, I'm still kind of considering little situations where maybe I really drop someone like Salah for Jota, and then open up opportunity for someone like Lukaku or even Kane in my team, and think about different ways to play around these kind of events. I think a lot of people are also looking at DCL. He's someone I think who's set to rise tonight, which of course means that the side grade for Ings is not going to be there as an opportunity. But I still think that Bamford is still probably the more interesting player at 8.0. I know DCL being on penalties has been a huge kind of boost. And that's something I mentioned in the preseason. I thought he would be on penalties, especially with the news that we had in the preseason anyways. But as things stand, I think DCL is a fantastic option. We had also Dele Alli taking a penalty, which was hard to take, to be honest, as someone who had Son in my team. It seems like Son might be dealing with a knock as well. So once again, I have to hold my transfer a little bit late, get a feel for what Nuno is going to kind of deliver to us in terms of how player fitness is. I think and I hope that Son is rested and should be totally fine for the next 2 game weeks, because those are the ones where I really brought Son in to attack. And as you can see, the clear kind of outlier in my team is someone like a Greenwood, right? For a lot of people who have, I think, a Marti ownership, I think you've gotten a bit lucky in the sense that with Vestergaard's injury, he might once again see the field again. Of course, it wasn't a great performance versus West Ham, which I expected based on just watching last year's games and not really expecting too much different. I think Amartey could once again have decent-ish dividends versus Norwich. You know, Norwich have been struggling, I would say, to attack versus most teams. One of the things, of course, though, is I do think Leicester's defense has still been rather flimsy. Wolves created several opportunities versus Leicester, really should have scored them as well. You could argue the same would have happened versus Spurs. I think Adama has, you know, within the last 2 weeks missed some huge opportunities, but that's not something unexpected. He kind of creates these situations where he provides like a physical package that no other kind of player in the world brings, and he kind of gets himself into these positions where clearly he can't finish them, and that's the unfortunate thing with Adama Traore. But I think Wolves are actually a promising team, and that kind of hurts my ability to captain you know, either Son or Fernandes, I think, the next week with the kind of concerns that I have, which means that obviously Antonio is the one that I'm going to target for Crystal Palace. Such a lovely fixture. They're once again playing at home again. I mean, you couldn't really shout a better fixture to, I think, move away from a Salah Fernandes captain for the first time this season and be kind of decisive with it and be sure it's going to work out. Because I think when you obviously look, you know, retrospectively, yes, Salah Fernandes blanked this week, but the underlying kind of, I think, reasons to captain them this week were always there. And the question was whether you enjoyed the Burnley matchup more or you enjoyed Southampton, to be honest, who have given away a lot of chances and allowed a lot of teams to build great XG chances versus them. I just thought United played a very poor overall team game, with individuals as well kind of stepping off the gas at some points in the game. But as things stand, I think I'm going to hold my transfers until the 25th/26th of August. I'd also maybe potentially wait to see if there are any kind of injury situations, because I don't have any players that I have to necessarily knee-jerk into. Dean is someone who could, as the week goes on, really drop into 5.4. So if I am forced into a situation, I think I will do a 1-for-1 swap where he either goes out for Soufal or honestly someone like Reguilon, who I might prefer a little bit than Tanganga, just because I thought that Tanganga had a bit of a poor game versus Wolves. I thought he showed some sort of weakness there, but at the same time, it's Adama Traore. It's not a threat that you consistently have to deal with as a defender. So that is kind of where I'm thinking. I'll probably have to make my first transfer in, unfortunately. But those are how things stand right now. Ultimately, still a fantastic week because, you know, we built a very solid bedrock with Benrahma and Antonio. To all you guys looking for transfers, I would say, you know, unless you have some players who are dropping in value very quickly, and you expect to kind of drop it in terms of price rises, like when we look at the price rises here, Benrahma and Antonio clearly going up, which is beneficial for my team. Lukaku is obviously going up, but still, you can kind of reach him if you have, you know, Fernandes and Salah, which is not a problem for me. Simicast going to 4.2 means that I will get that 0.1, so I can kind of move into any kind of player I like that has already moved up by 0.1 million, which is fine. Clearly Reguilon is about to also go up in price, so I might want to kind of jump on that train before it's too late or too early, in terms of Dean as well. And I think that's how things stand for me. I'm not too interested in Calvert-Lewin right now. I still think the side grade into Benrahma, whilst also kind of taking a bit of a hit when Bamford has to play Liverpool, is totally fine. Because I just have overall more faith, I think, in terms of Bamford being able to deliver without me having to kind of reorganize things and try to get DCL too early, in my opinion. And those are how things really stand for my team. If we kind of look at the price decreases or some of the other interesting players who are about to price rise, Reece James is super interesting as a Chelsea player because it seems like he obviously has less competition in terms of the Alonso/Chilwell front. When we're talking about right wing back for Chelsea and right centre back, those are both positions that he can kind of flex into, which is a really, really nice kind of added benefit that he has. Livramento is close as well to being 4.1, which is a bit worrisome. I feel like if I could get into a position where I can spend a transfer, I would definitely love to have in my team, but I don't think I can really build too much value with him right now since there are clear priorities in my squad that I have to adjust, especially if I have to look at the international kind of break and such issues. But if we go all the way to the back, clearly some players that we expected to do poorly have started to fall. Doherty and Buendia in this section here. Cavani as well. Firpo, which is interesting because I think a lot of people expected him to be an interesting attacking Leeds option, but ultimately when we go back to it, the Leeds fixtures were just tough to start, right? There were other kind of mid-table teams that had better fixtures in terms of West Ham, which is the quintessential kind of team that I think really compares to Leeds in a similar way in terms of how their assets are fantastic for FPL. Stones also kind of dropping in prices has been a bit of a worrisome kind of sign, I would say. I think Laporte is going to start next week, which is clearly why he's set to drop in price. It could be a nice thing though, picking him up later in the season, and with Kane also dropping in price or set to drop in price once again, it makes moving into Kane a lot easier. Once again, I would kind of hold caution and have a look at Nuno's press conference and see if there are any kind of updates on that front. But those are how things really stand for me. All the other kind of price drops I don't think are particularly interesting. I think they're expected, to be honest. Nothing too out of the blue right here. And perhaps the Barnes one being quite the shocker given the fact that he does play a very nice fixture versus Norwich. But it seems like everyone is probably, trend-wise, probably going to move into Benrahma. So if we look at midfielders, we can clearly see that that's the case. Barnes has been a direct kind of pivot into Benrahma, which is totally fine. I think that's what we expected. In terms of forwards, people have clearly just shifted into Antonio, and I can understand moving away from Tony. Moving into Ings at this point in time is a bit questionable, but Lukaku I think is one of those players who seems like he will be able to beat his fixtures no matter what. Goalkeeper-wise, some people have trended towards Lloris simply because he's done so well. Some people have moved out of Martinez to start building value or to go into Raya for Brentford. But I will say that I think Brentford were lucky to, well, not lucky, but rather facing some very poor attacks in the first 2 weeks. And I think they will struggle as time goes on to do so well from a defensive end, even though they look generally quite organized. I think just on an individual level, they will struggle versus some of the top players who can create chances and creative kind of schemes that you can't really defend naturally. But those are how things stand right now. I think once again it's about kind of showing a little bit of caution at this time of the year, mostly due to the fact that these travel restrictions are causing a huge headache, and ultimately that's what we have to deal with now. This is the kind of landscape we are in with FPL. We have to kind of take these things into account. But I think overall I'm happy with being still within the top 50,000, and a lot of regrets, of course, in terms of knowing where I would drop points and still allowing myself to drop those points. But the season is long, and I'm still quite optimistic, I think, overall. I hope you guys had a fantastic week yourselves, and we'll see how things go along. If you have any questions about the week ahead and what transfers you should bring in, feel free to drop them in the video.